Hey buddy, I'm Jack Mandeville, and this is Jacked History. Rumors can be hurtful and damaging. If you grew up in the 90s like me, there was the rumor that Marilyn Manson had a rib removed so he could do the thing to himself with his mouth that usually takes another person to do. You know what I'm talking about. That rumor just started out of nowhere one day, and every kid in America just seemed to believe it without question, even though there's no evidence that was ever a thing. Speaking of Marilyn Manson, there was also the rumor that Paul from the Wonder Years grew up to be Marilyn Manson, and we all just believed that shit until the internet became more common and it could easily be disproved.
What an idiot! Oh, what a loser!
And of course, there was the rumor in 5th grade that Jack Mandeville pissed his pants during recess, but he had like a dozen witnesses that saw him fall in a puddle of mud while playing football. The wet spot was clearly above his crotch line. Seriously, who pisses themselves going up? If it was piss, the piss would be below the crotch line. It was just rainwater, not piss, okay? What was I saying? Oh yeah, rumors can be hurtful and hard to forget. But some rumors can have even more dangerous implications. While the French monarchy was definitely not a bunch of innocents by any means, a rumor started that Marie Antoinette, the wife of King Louis XVI, said, "Let them eat cake," or she was actually German, "let them eat cake." I can't do those accents. When questioned about the mass starvation of French citizens.
Let them eat cake.
While there's no proof she ever said that, that rumor was enough to be a contributing factor in the beheading of her and her husband. And in World War I, a baseless rumor that started among Canadian troops was enough to send them into a level of war crimes that humbled pretty much everyone else on the battlefield. Today, we're talking about Canadian war crimes in World War I. Also, let me just be clear. There's no pure good versus pure evil in a war of that magnitude. Nobody involved with that conflict were angels by any stretch of the imagination. It's just that when you look at the size of Canadian troops involved on the Allied side during that war, the stuff they did, both the heroics and shady stuff, it was disproportionately high. Furthermore, while French and British peoples were truly feeling the effects of the war on their home soil, why did Canadian troops from thousands of miles away, whose civilians were completely safe compared to the French and British, go so hard on the Germans? And I'm not even going to bring up the US troops because we didn't come into the war until about halfway through third period. That's a hockey reference because, this episode's about Canada. All right, let's back it up a bit for some context. Prior to the 20th century, Canada's military was only really used to service the British Crown in times of need. Simply explained, the Brits would be up to something around North America and they'd snatch up Canadians to fill up their ranks in times of need. The most notable example is during the War of 1812 when Canadian soldiers shared in the credit of burning down the American White House. We haven't forgotten about that, Canada. It wasn't until the Second Boer Wars in the early 20th century that Britain used Canadians in overseas deployments, and right around that time, Canada established its own independent army, navy, and air force.
Pilot, bomb down, we're nearing the target. The bomb's ready, buddy.
By the time World War I broke out, though they had more autonomy over their military forces, Canada sprung into action in Europe. It was early in Canada's distinguished service in World War I that a rumor spread amongst Canuck troops that a Canadian officer had been captured and crucified on a barn door by the Germans. There has never been any evidence that this ever happened. Most historians agree it never happened. But a rumor is a rumor. I get that. You ever seen that HBO miniseries, Generation Kill? The part where a rumor spreads around the camp that J-Lo died and the entire division is obsessed about it and can't get it out of their minds? Well, that wasn't some anecdote by the screenwriters. I was in 1st Marine Division at that time, in the same camp as those guys depicted in the miniseries, and we really were freaked out about that rumor. And if something as silly as that could get people in 2003 to be bummed, you could only imagine how a rumor could spread in 1915 that one of your own was crucified like a fucking biblical character. To add on to that, as we're about to get into the war crimes, Canadians were among the hardest hit when the Germans first used poison gas in 1915. And we do know for a fact that happened, and it was an experience straight out of a horror movie for those young men. Even into the early days of the war, troops on both sides had developed a live and let live policy, where both sides agreed to not attack each other unless ordered to by the higher ups. This, for example, is highlighted in the famous Christmas truce when German and British soldiers temporarily stopped the fighting to break bread and play soccer with each other. Well, Canadians were having none of that. The following Christmas, when Germans tried to do that with the opposing Canadians, it didn't end well for them. "Merry Christmas, Canada!" the German soldiers yelled as they popped over the trench and waved boxes of cigars at the Canucks as a peace offering. So what did the Canadians decide to do? Well, they mowed them down with machine guns. There was also an instance when, sitting in their trenches, Canadians tossed tins of corned beef hash into the hungry and beleaguered German trenches. These Germans, who were used to exchanging such pleasantries with the British and French, began screaming, "More! More! Give us more!" in broken English. So the Canadians moved closer to the now more comfortable Germans, and they proceeded to launch a barrage of grenades into the trench and just wiped out the complacent German soldiers. God damn. Wait. Maybe this was just a language barrier thing? Maybe they didn't realize the Germans were trying to show solidarity in their body language. No! This was deliberate. Canadian officers were known for explicitly ordering their men not to take prisoners. One former private recounted his officer told him, and I quote, "Remember, no prisoners. They will just eat up your rations." And boy, did they love bayoneting surrendering enemy. Like straight up, hands up, no weapon, white flag. That wasn't good enough for the Canadians. One former Canadian officer was quoted as saying, "We rushed them and they had the nerve to throw up their hands and cry, 'Comrade!' All the comrade they got was a foot of cold steel through them." Damn. One Canadian POW was told, after taking a beating from a German officer, "I don't care for the English, Scotch, French, Australians, or Belgians, but damn you Canadians, you take no prisoners, and you kill our wounded." That's not a good German accent, is it, Peter? It's not that good. You think the Germans are going to critique it, or they? Well, they're not. I'm not speaking German, so they're not going to give me shit for it, right? Okay. And of course, there's the well-documented case where a Canadian soldier was walking past a captured German and decided to just pop open his grenade, put it in the German's little sleeve, and walk away and let the German just blow up. And nobody did anything to stop him. Before I go further, I hope none of you are getting the impression that this war was some sort of honorable endeavor where both sides were perfectly living by the codes of war. No, effed up things were happening on both sides by all nationalities. It's just that Canadians had really carved out an extra brutal reputation, partly due to the fact that they were being utilized in offensive operations at a disproportionately high rate, so the stories of their brutalness were more shared. Americans that showed up during the last year of the war also got a reputation as overly aggressive with their use of shotguns during trench raids. There was just something about those North American boys that made them a little more savage than those European boys. Speaking of trench raids, Canadians love that shit. While many friendly and enemy European nations were abandoning the practice near the end of the war, the Canucks went hard at it. They'd put on thick black rubber gloves, paint their faces black in a time that really wasn't a thing in warfare yet. They'd load up on homemade pipe bombs and other out-of-the-ordinary weapons. They'd fix bayonets, then move quietly in the middle of the night until they found a German trench, launch a wall of explosives, and just lay waste once they jumped in, shooting at point-blank range, bayoneting soldiers to death, strangling them to death, and like I said earlier, it was pointless to try to surrender to them. Trench raids proved little tactical advantage. Main offensive charges were meant to take and hold ground, as you do in war. Trench raids were purely there to wreak havoc, deplete enemy numbers, and crush their morale. It all makes sense why Canadians excelled at this. Europe was more industrialized. More people lived in the city. And not that city tough doesn't bring its own brand of grit, but Canada in the early 20th century was mostly backwoods other than a few cities. Where only 20% of Canadians now are considered rural, it was around 55% during World War I. These are people that were cut off from any outside help. They had to do what they had to do to survive in most provinces. Stalk, hunt, and live off the animals they killed. Survive off the things they could only grow in a select part of the year. Build their dwellings on their own. Protect themselves and their families in no man's land. Brave sketchy roads to travel anywhere significant. It was a hard-ass place to live and produced hard-ass people. I don't know if you've ever been to Manitoba in the wintertime, but that place is brutal. Or if you've ever met folks from Alberta, like I did in the oil field. They can be real assholes. And then there's my friend Dylan from Hamilton, Ontario. He fights bears. Bears! So yeah, it should be no surprise that when World War II came calling 20 years later, Allied European forces were ready to welcome back the Canadians as folks that were willing to go an extra mile in combat. And boy, do they have some good war crime doozies from that conflict too. But I'm going to end it there, as this episode is only about World War I, and we have 3 episodes to film today. Oh, let me guess, because this is an episode about Canada, you're going to go to the comments section and comment, 51st state? Real original! You're Shane Gillis, you're a genius. You're a comedic genius for that comment. No, really, you should comment that because it creates more engagement for me. If you're an American, comment 51st state. Actually, if you're a Canadian, comment back towards the Americans who are commenting 51st state. Get into it with each other. It's good for engagement. Please like, subscribe, share, push that notification button, and binge watch other episodes if you haven't seen them yet. Oh, Canada, I stand on guard for thee. How's that, Peter?
Canadians, you scream your ass off. Canadians, when they do war crimes. Canadians, when they get in hockey fights. Canadians, when they do blackface. Canadians, when they go to school. Our neighbors to the north love tasty meat. They use grill your ass off and watch Jack's history.